Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to another star-studded Godzilla review because today we have an all-star movie, which is considered one of the greatest Godzilla movies in my opinion in the Showa era, next to Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, next to the original one, and of course Godzilla vs. Hedorah. We have Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla, part 1 of the Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla series. Before we get too deep into this though, we gotta address something and talk about something real quick. It's been a long crawl for the Godzilla series, I mean seriously. We started as a serious allegory for the atomic bombings on Japan, and then gradually the tone kind of shifted and became, kind of more heroic. Godzilla became a children's child hero gradually. We saw some ups and we saw some downs, but predominantly it's been fun though. But here we are now into this movie to where we're kind of winding down the Showa area. We're almost done here. So how do you wrap things up? How do you go out with a bang? Well, here's the deal. They didn't realize at this point that it was gonna be the last of Godzilla, these next two movies. But definitely, I gotta say, looking at this though, this was the perfect way to wrap things up. Because beyond this movie, there is one more movie. And why not just do a part 1 and part 2 movie? Now, I do understand real quick, there was some ideas for Godzilla movies after 1975, which Terror of MechaGodzilla will be the eventual movie we'll be reviewing. But the thing is though, this being wrapped up into one ball and introducing the final villain for the Showa era is just absolutely perfect. Our last few movies always kind of centered around a young child. Not every one of them, but that was kind of a common key point that we always saw in every movie, kind of like Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, Godzilla's Revenge, and Godzilla vs. Megalon. This movie though, it just kind of deviates away from it, and for a change, I'm okay with that. I mean, perfectly okay with it. We are 20 years removed from the original Godzilla movie, so the tone of this is kind of shifting. We're still got childlike undertones, and we're still having fun in this era, but this movie, I feel like it takes the best of both worlds, with, say, like the era of Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, and a little bit that we've kind of seen in the previous movies, and just brings it together. And I think it really works really well. And we are introducing probably the second, this is kind of arguable, but the second most iconic villain, only to King Ghidorah, which is MechaGodzilla himself. This is really a Godzilla movie with several different titles. Godzilla vs. the Cosmic Monster, Godzilla vs. the Bionic Monster, but above all, it is known as Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla. And really, honestly, if I'm honest about Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla, I think that is probably the best MechaGodzilla movie in the Showa era. That is something that's probably up for debate though, because I'm sure you have people that prefer Terror of MechaGodzilla, which when I talk about that, I just want to say the tone of that movie is drastically different than this movie itself, even though this movie is kind of shifting compared to the previous Godzilla movies. It's kind of interesting to see just from this movie to the next how much things change. I feel like one thing that's worth mentioning about this movie that it does away with the fact it does not use a lot of stock footage. I mean, yes, you do see a little flashback sequence of King Ghidorah in the movie, but overall though, I'm so thankful that they didn't bother with the stock footage, because that's something, while it kind of was okay in the last few movies, it was kind of absurd and kind of annoying in certain spurts. So because of that, that's what kind of takes the last few movies just down a notch, a hair. One of my favorite aspects about this movie is the sheer fact that it really kind of keeps you in the dark about what's going on, even though you literally know the title of this movie is Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla. I mean, Godzilla opens up this movie as the bad guy, literally, and you're kind of like, well, what's going on here? Did he just kind of get tired of being an Earth Defender? Is he just fed up with us? What's wrong now? Godzilla is destroying the people. Is he? Is he? That's the question that you will be asking as this movie progresses, because as he takes on Anguirus, you tend to notice that something's up, something isn't right. Why would he attack his best friend, his partner in crime, Anguirus? As a viewer, you proceed to watch this battle and you notice a part of Godzilla comes off, his skin gets teared off, and you notice that there's a metallic underneath. Godzilla, has he been a cyborg the entire time? Has he possibly been? Not exactly, because obviously you gotta think, watching so many Godzilla movies, you gotta realize and think, yeah, there's somebody probably in control of this and there's something else going on that's a bit bigger than what we understand. And that is absolutely what happens, because Godzilla is under control of aliens. But this isn't any Godzilla, this is literally a MechaGodzilla, just as the movie obviously implies, and that's one of the greatest things that I love about this movie, because it really just implies that he is indeed a mech. I mean, literally, it's on the box art of this movie that you get, it's on the posters. But you watch this movie and you kind of forget what's going on a little bit, and I just love the build-up of this movie, from the introduction of him being a clone Godzilla or posing as Godzilla. It's brilliantly done. I just want to say though, it is at the expense of Anguirus, who once again is being torn apart His head is almost being ripped off, his jaw is broken, he's all bloody. Anguirus did not deserve this. That's the worst part of this right here. Anguirus is just always the stepping stool. Every movie, why? We love Anguirus too much, and he's just constantly getting just beat the crap out of. Yeah, we had to use somebody to make an example out of, and it was Anguirus, one of the most lovable kaiju that we've seen so far, next to Godzilla. This ain't right. I'm telling you, it ain't right. It hurts to see this. And as if things aren't bizarre enough, another Godzilla shows up. Two Godzillas doing battle. Which is the real one? Well, it's obviously not the one with the orange atomic breath, because something is up with that one clearly. And we get one of the best reveals ever of all time. I mean, seriously. The music just hypes this up so much. Just seeing MechaGodzilla fully revealed. Rockets everywhere. Laser beams. This is clearly a Godzilla GOAT movie, and the MechaGodzilla revealed. Probably one of the best reveals of MechaGodzilla of all time. This is probably the greatest way to actually show him in all his technology and everything he has. He is just a metallic badass. One thing I should point out about this movie is the last few movies always kind of had a similar idea. You know, it was basically just two monsters against Godzilla and, you know, his partner. This movie, it could have easily recycled, say, Megalon, Gigan, or just somebody else and had him team up with MechaGodzilla, but didn't do that, because MechaGodzilla does not need no partner. He's already overpowered enough the way things are. It's Godzilla that decides to go ahead and team up with a new monster we'll talk about in a moment. But yeah, MechaGodzilla. There's no need, at least for this movie, to have, you know, a new monster, because we're trying to sell the audience of how powerful this thing is and display every bit of technology that it has and everything it can do. It almost kills Godzilla, and it probably would have, honestly. It's already very clear, known to the audience, that MechaGodzilla can handle Anguirus. He can handle Godzilla and King Caesar. So yeah, why exactly add in somebody because it's not needed? Hey, we'll see Titanosaurus in the next movie, who will team up with MechaGodzilla, but this time around, we're all about MechaGodzilla. The focus is on him and making him the best enemy that we can. Alright, let's go ahead and talk about King Caesar, shall we? Another newly introduced kaiju that debuts in this movie. And for a kaiju that's really hyped up, and really ominous with this story behind him, he's kind of a pushover to MechaGodzilla. I mean, it isn't the best debut for him. I mean, he gets rolled by MechaGodzilla right from the second he wakes up. After all that time of singing, getting him up, all that buildup of him basically being the third monster, yeah, he gets completely just rolled. The ominous prophecy, which goes, when the Black Mountain appears above in the clouds, a huge monster will arise and try to destroy the world, MechaGodzilla. But when the red moon sets and the sun rises in the west, two monsters shall appear to save the people, Godzilla and King Caesar. King Caesar is definitely a dope kaiju, but he gets his ass rocked in this battle, and it's not any different for Godzilla because Godzilla really does himself. I mean, Godzilla shows up, he gets bloodied, smacked around by MechaGodzilla, and he realistically needs King Caesar as assistance, because without it he probably would have died. Like, I don't think there's been a kaiju at this point that has been such a harm or menace towards Godzilla. I mean, Hedorah, yeah, definitely got the one-up on Godzilla at times, but Godzilla did end up overcoming Hedorah eventually, due to the people interfering and kind of helping him out. This time around, though, there's nothing for him. I mean, he's literally just depending up the sheer fact that he's able to one-up MechaGodzilla due to the fact that he became a electromagnetic field and becomes a literal magnet and ends up defeating MechaGodzilla because of it. And then after that, King Caesar gets up and decides to capitalize off it, and next thing you know, it's 2-on-1, and they get the best of MechaGodzilla. They end up twisting off his head, and the plans for the aliens are foiled now. Completely foiled. I really should talk about our charmingly evil alien race. Yes, the ones in the foil drip. The Black Hole, Planet 3 aliens, probably, in my opinion, the most fleshed out aliens in the Godzilla series next to Exilians. Oh yeah, and it's also worth mentioning that our aliens are sapient, ape-like beings in this movie, super intelligent. When they get shot, they go back to their form, and I want to go ahead and say, this kind of creeped me out a little bit as a kid. I'm going to go ahead and just say, as a kid, for whatever reason, these obnoxious things kind of creep me out in Godzilla movies, and I also do want to go ahead and mention, in these movies, it feels like there's always a catch when it comes to the aliens. I mean, we literally had cockroaches a few movies ago, and now we have apes. I don't know, maybe just in Japan they were obsessed with Planet of the Apes, which would have came out maybe about some 6 or 7 years earlier before this movie came out, and they kind of just incorporated the idea in there somewhere because of the fact that movie probably took over by storm over there. Nonetheless, though, this, again, like I said before, I want to repeat, is probably still one of the most fleshed out alien races in the Godzilla series, and they will return in the eventual next movie, which I think is super awesome, but the idea of them being apes when they get shot will be dropped. In my last review, I want to go ahead and say and talk about the fact that I referred to Godzilla vs. Megalon as a Godzilla goat movie, and I don't retract that. I just want to go ahead and say that Godzilla vs. Megalon, though, is probably a movie I consider a Godzilla goat movie due to the fact that it is super hokey and over the top and just extreme cheese. Now, yes, Godzilla movies in the Showa era always kind of had that trademark little cheese, obviously, but this movie just takes it to a new level, and I think that I give it so many more points for the villain that it introduces, and the fact the tone is kind of shifting due to the fact they kind of got rid of the idea of focusing on a little child, like they did in the past few movies. Something about this movie is just overall charming, and I think that this movie really, when I put it into a category of Godzilla movies, it's just in a completely different category than some of the other ones. Like, it feels like we're getting back on the right track. And I will talk about this more when we do get into Terror MechaGodzilla, because there's a lot more I do want to say about that movie, but for what this movie is worth, this is just pure brilliance. This is probably one of the first Godzilla movies. If somebody says, hey, I've never seen a Godzilla movie, this is the one I'm going to show them. It's going to be one of them. Now, obviously, if you want a long ride of Godzilla movies, I'm going to show you every freaking movie. But this movie, if you want one individual movie to go with, this is a key one to pull out in the collection and to have on hand. This is just one I'm going to go ahead and say is completely built different. The soundtrack, the battles, the presentation, the portrayal, and one of my favorite aspects that I'm never over is the portrayal of MechaGodzilla. I mean, just look at the movements of MechaGodzilla. I mean, you tend to forget that, yeah, this is a guy in the suit. I mean, if you can go ahead and kind of disconnect yourself from the fact that, yeah, you are literally watching men in a suit and this is an old movie, you're going to have fun watching this movie. And you can tell watching this movie and looking at everything that a lot of time, a lot of heart, a lot of love was just poured into portraying these kaiju, whether it was a mech or a kaiju, no matter what. MechaGodzilla definitely got a love and intention. This MechaGodzilla portrayal is just completely different, and I gotta say that it's definitely my favorite as far as portrayal goes. I don't know if it's my favorite MechaGodzilla design. It's definitely one of the best. It's definitely classic. I'd like to see something like this design return in a newer movie. We're not going to get into the whole legendary Godzilla vs. Kong design quite yet. We'll talk about that in another review, but this one, though, is completely classic, and it should always be somewhere in somebody's action figure collection. Unfortunately, I don't have one myself, but someday I will have one soon. Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla is a sharp movie. It's a ride. It's a movie I can watch spontaneously at any given time, and the best part is knowing that this wasn't the end of MechaGodzilla and Godzilla's rivalry, because we're going to see one more movie, Terror MechaGodzilla, which we'll talk about in the next movie, and I'm extremely hyped to talk about that and to wrap up the Showa era. And I think the Showa era definitely, I do want to say, I really appreciate everything that went into this series overall at this point. Just watching the evolution, it's just something brilliant. Even if we did see some moments to where it was kind of hard to hold on, this movie just makes the payoff really well. And like I said earlier on, we're getting to the point to where it's time to wrap down this era and go ahead and put it away, along with the Godzilla name, entirely probably about the next decade. Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla is the beginning of the end, basically, I should say. Head out and give it a watch. Terror MechaGodzilla next week. See you later.